Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talked to business person and author Myrna Marofsky, who is the keynote speaker of the upcoming Keeping the Spirit Alive Caregiving Conference. We talk about her book, To the Last Dance, a partner's story of living and loving through dementia, presenting on a panel with her daughters, and the importance of care living on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we get started, be sure to check out some of the other podcasts that Jewfolk produces, like The Jews Are Tired, where Lev Gringaus is taking a deep dive into Jewish news, Kumba Hineni, Jewfolk's podcast on intersectionality with your host, Enzi Tanner. And if you're looking for a weekly dose of Jewish pop culture, check out The Bagel Report, produced by Jewfolk in partnership with Jay, the Jewish News of Northern California. Go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast to learn more. Myrna Marofsky, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So I wanted to have you on this week. You have a book that came out recently called To the Last Dance, a partner's story of living and loving through dementia. And in sort of concert with that book being out, you are also the keynote speaker at the upcoming Keeping the Spirit Alive conference for caregivers and those supporting a loved one with dementia. It's Sunday, April 30th. We will have more details in the show notes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for starters, what was it that led you to write this book? 'Cause it's obviously a very personal story of what you went through with your husband, Larry.
It's a very personal story, and it's a story that I had no idea I would ever write. It's based on a dream I thought I never would have. So we all remember COVID, right? And that we were all in lockdown. And this was just about 2-3 months after Larry passed away. And he had a diagnosis of early stage Alzheimer's at age 70 and got more complicated as we went on until the last 2 years when he didn't speak at all. And so the 5 years of going through that with him were, I had a choice. I could either be a caregiver or I could do what I realized I defined was care living, which was making the most out of what we had and holding on to what we could in the middle of a lot of loss. And so after COVID, you asked me about how I wrote the book. I sat home during COVID and I thought about all of this and things that people had said to me over the years. And I just started writing. And I wrote, and then I threw it away. And then I wrote, and then I threw it away. And then I thought, why does anybody ever want to read this book? Because everybody knows the end. Larry passes away. So the more I wrote, the more I opened up my heart. And to my surprise, I wrote a love story.
That had to be such a hard time because obviously in getting into COVID, he passes away in November of 2019 and then COVID happened. So you're dealing with sort of the loneliness and loss of your husband anyway. And then it transitions right into this period where we have so much loneliness and isolation because of external forces. That must have been, I mean, just the confluence of timing must have been really, I would think, emotionally challenging to deal with.
Well, it was the loneliness for sure. But if you knew me, I just keep moving forward. So, and if you remember during COVID, we didn't know how long that was going to last. And so we thought, a few weeks we'll be home alone. And so I wrote a few weeks worth of writing and then it just kept going. And then the more I thought about it and saw what was happening around me and really reflected on some of the things I did, I started realizing that this is a story that really needs to be told. Because, and if you read my book, you'll know it's a story that I feel needs to be told because people don't tell this story. They don't hear it. The conversation around dementia is all around tragedy. Dementia becomes a tragedy. And I just couldn't live my life like that. And I felt like maybe others needed to hear that as well.
It feels like a very brave approach, I think, is the right way to say it, to sort of spin it that way rather than, taking yourself out of isolation, and others who will in the future be in that situation of taking care of a loved one going through that.
Right. Well, I didn't know it was brave, but I'm being told by the people who read my book, the thing that they say the most is thank you for telling your story. And when I started, I'm a business consultant. That's what I do. And I have an opinion about everything. So I really like to tell people, here's my opinion. And when I started writing, I thought this would be so great for doctors, because the doctors and the professionals I dealt with really didn't understand that dementia is more than a brain disease. It's a heart disease. It breaks your heart.
Hmm.
And so I really felt that that if I could tell my story to the professionals, they would have this book that they could give to people as a reference, as a guide, instead of those pamphlets that you get with pictures of old people and frail people and elderly. We were not elderly. We had a lot of life left to live, and a lot of dreams we had that we wanted to carry out. We wanted to get old together. And that was sort of forgotten in the diagnosis. It's all about the medical things. So as I was saying, I thought I would have this book that would be a resource. I thought that rabbis would have it in their drawer that they could give to couples when they come and face them. I thought that that social workers, I was talking to professionals at first, and then the book came out, and comments I hear are thank you, or this, you said things that were in my mind that I never said out loud, or you affirmed things, or I wish I would have thought about this. And people are buying it to give to their relatives so that they understand what they're going through. And so it just really changed in a lot of ways. And so, yes, it was bold and brave, and sort of mission driven without knowing it.
Well, it's interesting that you sort of discovered the mission, it sounds like, after the fact of writing it.
Yes. Yeah, I would say that you're correct on that, because the mission has changed. And so now my mission in the keynote that I'm going to be giving at the conference that's coming up is really about, we need to tell our stories, and we need to change the conversation around dementia from tragedy talk to possibilities, to hints of hope that you can still have a life and love together, that love and loss can coexist. Everybody focuses on the loss, on the medical issues, and the other side is forgotten. The other thing that I'm really passionate about, because I'm so passionate about empowering women, is to make sure that the story of a wife, a spouse, a partner is told, because that's rarely written about. Tell me a book that you know that has the story of what it's like to be on the other side of being a care person.
Right.
It doesn't exist. And maybe if it does, I haven't found it. But so I have a very strong mission to speak to women and care partners, because we are 65% of the unpaid caregivers in Minnesota. Oh, actually, let me change that. We are part of the 65% of unpaid caregivers in this country.
Wow.
And we are on the other side. We get a diagnosis too.
Yeah.
When we got the diagnosis, I was like, what about me? What about me? I want a life. And so my story is twofold. It's about how I I lived as Larry being my husband, not a patient to care for, and how we kept our marriage and our loving relationship to the degree we can. I'm not making this up that it's so easy. It was hard. It was hard. But I worked at keeping us together, but I also worked at keeping me together and having a life for me that I could keep my identity. So I kept working, not full time, but working very much involved with my kids and my grandkids. So there's two parts to this story.
So did you write this as, in a way, it sort of seems like a how-to manual, but on the other hand, did you write it from the perspective of kind of the things I wish I knew going through this?
I wrote it as not a how to. No
Okay.
way. There can never, ever be a how to. I really differentiate any books that are out there really about dementia as books about caregiving.
Hmm.
My book is about care living, and the difference is it's a mindset. And so, yeah, I wouldn't categorize this book as a how-to
Okay.
for sure, but I would categorize it as something refreshing and empowering and a new perspective that might give you some satisfaction in a very difficult time.
Okay. No, I understand that.
Mhm.
It's interesting to me because when a diagnosis like this comes, it obviously doesn't just impact, your husband as the person diagnosed with it, you as the spouse who has to take care, but it becomes sort of a whole family situation, if you will. And after you give the keynote at the conference on the 30th at Bethel, you're leading a breakout workshop with your daughters.
Right.
Is this something that the organizers had asked if this was something you'd be willing to do, or is this something you said, "We have this experience all together. This is a whole family situation. It would be good to have us all together to talk about it."
Yes, all of the above.
Okay, fair.
Um, I think that the organizers felt that in the book there was enough about how our family interacted. There was lots of aha moments for all of us as I realized that my daughters had to experience this in their own way and were experiencing this in their own way, and that I had allowed them to do that. So we had what we call courageous conversations, and we came to this realization that when, for example, when Eve would come over, oftentimes I would say, "Oh, will you fix this? Oh, I need this, and oh, my computer this," and I didn't realize she came over to be with her dad. She didn't come over to be helping me, and so I'd allow her to have that time, to have those quality times with her dad, um, and so you asked me how this breakout session happened. I had to convince my daughters that they too had a story that people needed to hear and that they have a perspective on this. So let me give you a little background. I work with women. That's the job I do. I work with business women, and they're probably many of them dealing with elderly parents who are going through one issue after another. And so I hear a lot. I hear a lot about daughters saying, "Oh, we finally got him into a assisted living, and now I can have my life." Oh, my brother didn't take his part. I had to do everything. So I hear a lot of stories, and I kept thinking as I'm hearing them, what was my daughters thinking? What's their experience like? And so, we talk about that. And there's a wonderful chapter in the book that I just love, which is a recollection of a conversation we had shortly after Larry died. And it was Yom Kippur, and we were just sitting and talking, and it was a time of forgiveness. So it seemed right to be having this conversation. And in the course of that conversation, they enlightened me quite a bit on where I didn't treat them as they were adults, and on and on. And I'm sure some of that will come out in this breakout session because it was enlightening to all of us. We're not shy about having conversations in our family. Even if they're yelling from the top of the steps to the bottom of the steps, they are conversations because we're always in a rush. And then somebody once told me, "You have a lot of directors in your family." And And that's very true.
Well, clearly you and your husband raised two take charge women.
Yeah, they are very different. Yeah. Yeah.
Before we leave the topic of the book, where can people find it if they want to read it or get it for somebody as a gift? Because obviously this is an important issue that people should be, you know, should be read up on. And this clearly gives a different perspective on so much of the literature that's out there.
Right. Well, my book is available at my website, myrnamarofsky.com. There are some other pieces of information on that website that might be helpful as well. And love to sell it as a bundle. You buy 3, you keep 1 and give 2 away, and then you have a conversation. And that seems to be selling quite well because that is the conversation I want to have happen. So I've made it a price that people can afford to be able to do that. And then because Larry was volunteered at so many places, I'm giving a portion of the profits away to Second Harvest Heartland, where they were so gracious to have him for 2 years.
Really important work that they do there, and it's really great that it's an opportunity for you in telling your and Larry's story and your family story as a whole, give back to that organization, which clearly was so important to you and to him.
Right.
So you mentioned that you work to empower women. What is, besides being an author and now a speaker on this topic, what is what is your other day job?
My day job. So I work as a chapter chair for an organization out of New York called the Women Presidents Organization, and I facilitate peer groups of women business owners. And we meet monthly and talk about leadership, running a business, growing a business. These are very large businesses that women have, and I've been doing that for 18 years.
Wow.
After I ran my business, I started doing this, and it's something that brings me great joy.
Were you always interested in the business world? Was that something you had always gotten into?
No.
Oh, what was the background then?
I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a serial entrepreneur, but I didn't know that. I started out like all Jewish kids in North Minneapolis. The girls had 3 choices. You could be a nurse, a beautician, or a teacher. So I became a teacher. And then surprise, surprise, you left when you were pregnant and you couldn't return.
Yep.
And so I just said, well, I'll try business, and did many things in the course of finally becoming a partner in a diversity and inclusion consulting firm for 22 years, and traveled all over working with Fortune 500 companies. And then we sold the business and I became this chapter chair. So
That's
yeah.
quite a ride from teacher to entrepreneur.
Right. With a stopover in making backpacks for women travelers. That was another business I had.
What what's different about backpacks for women travelers?
Well, they work and they don't look like a camping bag.
Ah, so
Mhm.
it's a stylistic choice.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a little stopover that we had for a while.
It's quite a journey.
Yeah, there's more, but
No,
we'll make it short.
no signs of slowing down.
No, well, this book hasn't helped. I haven't.
you brought that on yourself.
Yeah, that's right. There's a couple of things that are fascinating that I don't know if you want to put in this, but I have 2 speaking engagements that are really exciting for me beyond the conference. And one is this weekend. I will be speaking with Partners in Dementia, which is a program out of Health Partners where they pair third-year medical students going into gerontology with couples who have early stage onset Alzheimer's or dementia. And it's about learning for the doctors to learn what the real life stories are that go on. And it's just so exciting for me that this program exists and then I get an opportunity to talk to them. So,
and I think it's really important. Obviously, this will have run quite a while after this, after this topic, but I think it's great that you're able to do that because, going back to something you said earlier about giving the book as a gift to doctors. So they look at the patients and their family in a more holistic way rather than simply a diagnosis to treat.
That's right. Yes, because what happens, I don't know if you want a story, but
I'm always up for a good story.
Okay, so I'll tell you a story. If you can use it, fine. So it really was the impetus of me writing this book in a lot of ways, or getting the strategy that I had around this book. So Larry got a diagnosis, and we kind of knew it was coming. Something was going on, but I thought he would get a pill and then it would be fine. And I didn't realize all this. And so he gets a diagnosis. The doctor looks at us right after and says, "So what are you going to do now?" Like 2 minutes after we get this diagnosis, "What are you going to do now?" So that started like, no, we're going to figure this out. So we went for a second opinion. And at that time, they concurred with the diagnosis and asked for a family meeting. So we were all excited to come to that family meeting and hear some guidance, some hope, something more than actually what we got. We were all sitting around the table. Larry was sitting right in the middle. Sarah was sitting at one end with her husband and holding hands, full of questions of what she wanted. Eve at the other end. And the doctor just started going down this, you're going to lose this. Here are the stages of this. You're going to need care. The average lifespan is 4 to 8 years. And, Larry had become a specimen. He became the disease sitting right in front of us, talking about us. And there was very little, and it went on. There was a social worker there who told me, you got to get him on a list for a facility right away. It just was what I called tragedy talk, and that's what I call it. Mm-hmm. Later, as I was writing the book, I actually found that the AMA talks about this tragedy discourse around dementia as being more debilitating than the disease itself, that you get this mindset that it's a tragedy and that's how you treat it. And right. So you either have a choice. Is it a tragedy or is it living through it? And so the name of my book is, we should talk about that too, but one of the subtitles of my book is a partner's story of living through dementia, because lots of people live with it, but how are you going to live through it? And so that was a very significant choice of words there. And the title, "To the Last Dance," it reflects a very sweet last dance that Larry gave me in the hallway just days before he died. And it was that we got to this last dance that's significant, because if I hadn't, I really believe it was his gift for the way that we lived those last 5 years.
That is a great story. And I really, again, go back to the idea that doctors need to read this, and that you're speaking to medical students is amazing, because they need to hear this. They need to hear that the very sort of rote clinical way of doing it, and like you said, treating your husband like a specimen, is so detrimental. Right. And I think it's really important that this book is out there and tells people that no, there is another way to live through this.
So the other story I was going to tell you, or the other example, was I'm also speaking to the Minnesota chapter of elder law attorneys. And that's another group that I just like, whoa, Larry was an attorney. We had a lot of friends who were attorneys, and to be able to speak to them and say to them, When you ask somebody to sign here, there's more to that signature and that signing than you understand when you're dealing with dementia, because all of a sudden I'm responsible for things all by myself that I never thought about. And it represents the significant loss in a relationship. And so to be able to talk to them on a heartfelt level like that is really going to be something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Really important speaking engagements you're doing. But before we let you go, last couple of questions on a completely 180 topic from where we've been. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
My favorite Jewish holiday is Passover, Pesach.
How come?
Everybody's around the table. Everybody's around the table. I have a dining room table that underneath it's a hand-me-down from my parents, so it's about 80 years old.
Oh, so it's made really well then.
It's really made well. It's been redone a couple of times. But underneath my dining room table is in marker everybody who sat around that table over the years. So if you climbed underneath my dining room table, you'd see the years, the dates, the names, when my son-in-laws joined the family, when the grandkids joined the family. So I love having everybody around my dining room table. And Larry loved being at the head of that table. Now I am.
I love that story, though. Everybody writing, oh, that's so cool. It assures that that table is in the family forever. Like you could never get rid of something like that. That's amazing.
Right.
And what is your favorite Jewish food?
I have a lot. Potato latkes are really high on the list. Yeah.
Are you sour cream or applesauce?
Both. Yeah, both. You got to have both. Yeah. And you have to fry until your hair smells like oil and the whole house reeks.
And it's in the walls for days.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Myrna Marofsky, thank you so much for joining me today, for talking to me about the book, To the Last Dance. We will have links to your website where people can buy it and links to the Keeping the Spirit Alive conference for caregivers. It's at Bethel Synagogue on Sunday, April 30th. We'll have links to all of that on the website and in the show notes. But thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.